Welcome back. This is Today on eNCA. Unisa hosted the 12th annual Thabo Mbeki Africa Day lecture last night under the theme, The African Union at 20. Professor Puleng Lenkabula, who delivered the lecture, reflected on the role of the youth and its part in changing the future. For more on this conversation, I'm joined now by Professor Puleng Lenkabula, who is the vice-chancellor of Unisa. Prof, good afternoon. Thank you for joining me. I truly enjoyed this lecture, I must say. It wasn't one of those that were heavy on rhyme and prose and cadence and, getting you all excited. But in as far as the substance is concerned, I must say I truly enjoyed it. It was well balanced, I thought. What did you think?
I actually appreciated Professor Puleng Lenkabula's analysis around the value that the African Union, since its inception or formation in 2002, would have accomplished. But I also think, as a scholar, it's often important not only to deal with the sites of excellence or success, but to demonstrate the areas of development that the democratic value or benefit would have yielded, and those barriers that would have undermined such successes. And he like you say, Thulasizwe, did this very beautifully, and I'm appreciative that you liked it.
Yeah, I really did.
Scholars. I did, and he's very calm and able to help us to understanding that his generation and the generation of researchers and intellectuals such as Ngugi and others would have used pan-Africanist anti-colonial, decolonial discourses to analyze the developments in the continent. And he recognizes that a multi-generational analysis of Africa should also take into cognizance what happens outside the university, what happens within the university, including in multilateral institutions such as the African Union. And I like that because it therefore meant youth and young adults today who sometimes express despondency found themselves reaffirmed in the lecture, especially around the evolution of theories, advocacy, and ideas that they bring to the table around their vision of Africa as they experience it, but as they imagine would progress to.
And Prof, it wasn't an easy task for Prof. Falula to deliver this lecture with the AU at 20, which is half the age, the lifespan of the then Organization of African Unity. And he had to, his reflections had to span everything from peace and security to the architecture and infrastructure of the AU, all the way to academia. I liked, though, that he, towards the end there, he had specific sector-specific messages, and I think you touched on it a little bit. There was something in it there that was a challenge for you in academia, from Cape to Cairo. Just reflect on that challenge that applies specifically to academia and the role that you can play and the institutions that you lead in finding solutions for the continent.
You're right, Thulasizwe. What Professor Falula raised is the fact that universities in Africa, but also the globe around, have one of the an area of development that we must work towards, which is an area of engaged scholarship, where research translates into radical, revolutionary, and transformative impulses in society. And his concern was that in the main, we teach colonial and Western knowledge systems that does not have resonance to issues of food security and food sovereignty, issues of independence, acknowledgement of the developments in the creative industries around which majority of the youth in the continent are influencing the globalization and global systems in the world. And his invitation was for universities to ensure that these particular inventive aspects or even inventive outputs of youth and young adults are recognized. And this is quite important because even in the African Union, it's only recently, in the past 5 years, that the Youth Commission was assembled and it had a voice to express. And I think this is an important aspect. The second aspect about Africa's epistemologies and knowledge systems is the fact that we don't come into the global knowledge arena as the margins, but we influence it from the vantage point of Africa's knowledge systems, civilizations, ideas, philosophies, but taking cognizance of the fact that the youthful dividend is an important aspect. Sustainable development are important for livelihoods and well-being and humanity that is grappling with climatic changes and environmental discord that we would have experienced in Durban.
Lastly, Prof, your reflections on what he had to say around the African Union, because at the end of the day, the theme was the African Union at 20. One of the things for me that he highlighted that I don't always think about is that the AU, in addition to being a political body with all these leaders and heads of states, it's got institutions, it's got mechanisms that it has set in place, such as the African Peer Review Mechanism and the peace and security architecture that it has put in place. There was a point where he said, where he listed and said, all these problems that you think about as African citizens, don't for a second think that the civil service, and I'd not even, for some of us don't think in those terms, that there's a civil service involved in the AU. Don't think for a moment that the civil service and the architecture of the AU were not seized with these matters. Just your overall thoughts around his assessment of the AU, because as I say, he didn't paint a too rosy a picture, but it wasn't all doom and gloom as well.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency for us as Africans to undermine the value propositions that we make to the global arena. And therefore, his impulse, or he was impelling us to recognize that despite the democratic deficit, which he described as a very important theoretical concept for us in the academy, despite all those matters, that there is an imperative to ensure that we improve even these aspects. It is a well-known fact that the predecessor of the African Union created the idea of an enjoined multilateral systems. NAFTA and the EU never existed. And this is a proposition around the collective approach to governance that Africa would have bequeathed the world, which has worked well for others and maybe not as much for us, and this is not celebrated. It is a well-known fact that open distance e-learning or virtual universities in the globe never existed. This was an idea that the University of South Africa would have created. But the world does not know about this inventive aspect that Africa has bequeathed to the world, and I think that's what he was raising. But I think it's also in concert with the Chancellor, President Mbeki's appeal to the fact that when we understand our cultural, our ecological and economic foundations as a society and the cultural renaissance that he was speaking about when the foundation of the African Union as in catapulting and trying to ensure that the contextual existences of Africa, not the 1963 experiences when Africa was agitating for freedom, was taken into account. So I think it was quite balanced. It's invitational to you as media, whether you understand these shifts and movements. But for me as a Vice-Chancellor, what curriculum and epistemologies do we center in reclaiming Africa's intellectual successes and Africa Day?
Vice-Chancellor Puleng Lenkabula, thank you for your time, Prof, here on Today on eNCA. And as I say, I truly enjoyed that lecture. And it was a timeless message as well, very timely in terms of the areas that it covered, issues such as xenophobia. Professor Falula basically exhorting all of us in the AU to address those issues, terrorism, unconstitutional changes of government, and also talking to the infrastructure of the AU itself. It was well balanced. Not too rosy, but also not to fill you with dejection and just feeling like nothing works. Just balanced. All right, let's come back.